The most beautiful creature I have ever beheld. But her sister Elizabeth is very agreeable.
Perfectly tolerable, I dare say. Not handsome enough to tempt me.
The more times I watch Pride and Prejudice, the more convinced I am that Mr. Darcy's greatest flaw isn't pride. I know, it's right there in the title, but hear me out. Pride is certainly a problem for him, but I think an equally strong case can be made for hypocrisy. Not malicious hypocrisy, not the kind where somebody knowingly applies one standard to themselves and another to everyone else. Mr. Darcy's version is far more entertaining because I genuinely don't think he realizes he's doing it. One of the things I love most about his character is that he thinks of himself as a remarkably rational man. He trusts his judgment. He trusts his ability to assess people correctly. He trusts his understanding of what is sensible, proper, and appropriate. Then Elizabeth, Bennet, enters his life and suddenly all those carefully arranged principles start behaving very strangely. The rules remain in place for everyone else, but whenever Elizabeth is involved, Mr. Darcy begins finding exceptions he never knew existed. And nowhere is that more obvious than around the time of the Netherfield Ball. At this point in the story, Darcy has already identified several reasons why Elizabeth is an unsuitable object of affection. Her family embarrasses him, their behaviour embarrasses him, their connections embarrass him. If Darcy were grading the Bennet on paper, they would be failing spectacularly. The problem is that his heart has apparently misplaced the grading rubric because despite all of these objections, he continues behaving like a man who is completely and utterly finished. We have to begin, of course, with one of the most famous insults in literary history. Poor Elizabeth has barely entered Mr. Darcy's orbit before he dismisses her as not handsome enough to tempt me. Now, Mr. Darcy defenders often rush to explain this moment. He was irritated, he was being dismissive, he didn't think she'd hear him. All true, but the problem with that defense is that the rest of the film exists. Because for a man who claims not to be tempted, Darcy spends an extraordinary amount of time paying attention to Elizabeth Bennet. He watches her, he listens to her, he remembers things she says, he seeks out conversations with her, and perhaps most damningly of all, he appears genuinely interested in her opinions. This is not the behavior of a man who has dismissed someone from consideration. This is the behavior of a man who is already intrigued and is desperately hoping nobody notices. I think that's why the insult ages so badly. Not because Elizabeth suddenly becomes more attractive to him as the film progresses, but because his actions immediately begin contradicting his words. If Mr. Darcy had simply ignored her after Meryton, the comment would remain cruel but consistent. Instead, he spends the rest of the story acting like a man trying very hard not to admit he finds her fascinating. What really convinces me that Darcy is losing control of the situation long before he realizes it is the dance at the Netherfield Ball. Earlier in the film, Elizabeth makes her views on dancing quite clear. She associates dancing with courtship. She sees it as something that encourages affection. It's not simply an activity to her, it means something. Now imagine you're Mr. Darcy. You've already decided that Elizabeth is unsuitable. You've already identified numerous practical reasons why pursuing her would be a bad idea. You pride yourself on being sensible. Logically, the correct response would be to create some distance, perhaps stop staring at her from across rooms, maybe avoid unnecessary interactions. Certainly don't seek out moments that could deepen an attachment you're supposedly trying to resist. Instead, Mr. Darcy asks her to dance. Nobody tricks him, nobody even suggests it. He chooses to do it entirely on his own accord. And what follows is one of the most fascinating scenes in the film, because it barely resembles a romantic dance at all. They're challenging each other, provoking each other, questioning each other. On the surface, it feels argumentative. Underneath it, however, is the simple fact that Mr. Darcy wanted to spend time with Elizabeth. That decision alone tells us far more about his feelings than any speech ever could. This is where Darcy's hypocrisy reaches its peak for me, because the Netherfield Ball should, in theory, have settled the matter entirely. If everything Mr. Darcy claims to value is genuinely as important as he says it is, then this evening ought to cure him of his attachment once and for all. Mrs. Bennet spends the evening discussing Jane and Bingley as though the wedding invitations have already been mailed. Mary delivers a performance that appears to have no natural ending point. Lydia and Kitty behave exactly like Lydia and Kitty. Mr. Collins continues his tireless mission of making every interaction slightly uncomfortable. From Mr. Darcy's perspective, every concern he has about the Bennet family is being confirmed in real time. It's almost as though the universe is assembling evidence specifically for his benefit, and yet none of it works. That is what I find so revealing. The evidence here, the objections are there. The practical concerns are there. Mr. Darcy sees them all and somehow walks away just as attached to Elizabeth as before. Perhaps even more so. The evening should have strengthened his resistance. Instead, it exposes how little control he actually has over his feelings. Now, the contradiction becomes even more obvious when we consider Jane and Mr. Bingley. Eventually, Mr. Darcy persuades Mr. Bingley to walk away from the relationship, and one of the reasons he gives is the impropriety of Jane's family. The Bennets, according to Mr. Darcy, are not a suitable connection. Their behaviour creates complications. Their conduct reflects poorly on the match. Now, whether he's right or wrong is not the point here. The point is that Darcy clearly believes these concerns are serious enough to interfere in his best friend's happiness. Yet somehow, they're not serious enough to stop him from falling for Elizabeth. falling in love with Elizabeth. That's the part that fascinates me, because if the Bennets are truly disqualifying, why does Mr. Darcy continue pursuing her emotionally? Why does he keep seeking her company? Why does he keep thinking about her? Why does he keep showing up wherever she happens to be? The standard he applies to Mr. Bingley suddenly becomes remarkably flexible when he's the one in love. And then we arrive at Rosings, where Mr. Darcy becomes almost impossible to defend. This adaptation actually tones it down a bit, because in the book, the man just keeps appearing constantly. She visits the Collinses and there he is. She's out on a walk and boom, he's there too. She turns around for 5 minutes and somehow he is materialized again. The funniest part is that Elizabeth genuinely has no idea what's happening. As far as she knows, Darcy doesn't particularly like her. He certainly hasn't communicated otherwise. Meanwhile, he behaves like a man who cannot stay away. It's one of my favourite stretches of the film because Darcy's no longer even pretending to avoid temptation. He has gone from resisting his feelings to casually arranging his day around opportunities to see Elizabeth, all the while continuing to insist that the attachment is inconvenient. Sir. Inconvenience is usually something people avoid. You appear to be scheduling around it. What makes Darcy such a compelling romantic hero isn't that he falls in love. Plenty of characters fall in love. What makes him interesting is how long he spends arguing with the reality of it. He sees every obstacle, he understands every complication. He can list all the reasons the relationship should not work. The problem is that none of those reasons actually change how he feels. That ultimately is why I think the Netherfield Ball is so important. It's the moment where the audience can clearly see something that Mr. Darcy himself has not fully accepted. The evidence has stopped mattering, every objection remains intact, and yet his feelings continue growing anyway. For a man who prides himself on logic, that must have been deeply irritating. And perhaps that's why I find him so endearing. Beneath all the confidence, all the dignity, all the certainty, Mr. Darcy spends much of this film experiencing something profoundly human. He falls in love with someone who doesn't fit the life he imagined for himself. and then waste an extraordinary amount of time trying to convince himself that it isn't what's happening. Unfortunately for him, everyone watching can see it, even if he can't.